So I believe we were up to the Mishnah at the top of Yuram and Beis, which leaves us an Amid behind. So let's see the head of the Gemara. Para v'se'ir ha'mishtalech. The para aduma, which was considered a communal carbon, because even though it's not, they're not makbid in the Beis Hamikdash, the Tachman speaks out that it's considered a chatas. Osir ha'mishtalech is the sir hazazel. That's also considered a carbon because when they select it, they actually don't know which animal is going to be Lashem and which animal is going to be Lazazel. So that's why they can buy that from the Trumas Halashka. There was some wool that was thrown into the fire of the paraduma. So therefore, since these are all considered components of a carbon tzibur, you could purchase all of these items with the money from the Trumas Halashka. How about kevish para? The para aduma, there was a kula that they feared with the para aduma. And the reason why they feared with this kula is to refute and to demonstrate that the tzedaikim were wrong. The tzedaikim said that the kohen that was dealing with the paraduma has to be tahar, and he cannot even be a tefil yoim, meaning if he was coming off his tumah and he went to the mikveh, but he has to wait till the night, till he's completely tahar and he can eat kachim. The tzedaikim said a person in that condition, post mikveh, but before Herav Shemesh, could not deal with the paraduma. But we paskin, of course, that he could, and therefore they used to purposely make the kohen that was being oisik with the paraduma into its full yom to demonstrate it loud and clear that the tzedaikim were wrong. But since they instituted a kula into the preparation of the paraduma, they didn't want people to be lax in its kedusha, so they piled on a whole lot of major chumras to keep everything tahar.
It's a kula, isn't it? In halacha about its full yarn.
It's
a kula.
It's not a kula. It's the halacha that a full yarn could be oishik in the paraduma, but the tzedaikim said they couldn't. They didn't darshan the Torah properly. So since they acted according to that kula, it's not really kula. For the tzedaikim, it was a kula, but that's the halacha. There was a whole bunch of chumras they made. And one of the chumras that they made to maintain its tahira was they built a ramp from Yerushalayim to the place where they, on Har Zeisim, where they burnt the paraduma and they processed it. And it was a dual ramp. And the purpose of the ramp was to create an oihel beneath the kohen who was walking on the ramp, so that if there was any hidden graves below, the tumah would be captured or would be stopped by the oil, because tumah sameis does not penetrate an oil. So that ramp, or v'kevish sir mishtalech, the sir mishtalech that was taken to the Azazel on Yom Kippur, there was also a ramp that went over everybody's head, that went straight from the Beis Hamikdash to the place where the Azazel was thrown down. And the reason for that is that it's known that the Sir Azazel carries with it the Averis of Klal Yisrael. And there were Bavliim who were impatient, and they wanted that Azazel to be brought as quickly as possible. And therefore, they would rush the Ishiti who took the Sir Azazel out. And they rushed him, and they scrimped at him, and they pulled down his hair, and they harassed him. It was like paparazzi. So they had to create for him a VIP convoy, so to speak, to protect him from the masses. So they just made like an overhead cable car. It was a ramp so that he can get out without having to walk through the crowds. We know the Azazel, they have a red piece of wool that they put in between the horns of the Azazel. They actually split that piece of wool in half. A bit of the wool to put on the horns of the sheep, and some of the wool was kept in the Beis Hamikdash, and some of the wool was even at the top of the cliff. and everyone saw that it turned white when the azazel was thrown down. The amasamai and the water, the brook of water that went through the azar, again that was required. The chayma ir umidloisel, and the walls of the city and its fortresses, so communal municipal affairs, and all the other needs that the city needs, municipal needs, so that they didn't use some of the coins that were separated for Karbonis Sibur, the leftover funds in the Lishka that was not taken out for the Trumas Lishka, that money was used for all of these general communal matters, but not for Karbonis. Abba Sholomer, Kevesh Para, this special ramp that was made for the Kohen to take the Paradum out, Kohanim Gedolim Oisin Mishalatzim. The Kohanim Gedolim used to pay for this ramp, and we'll see in the Gemara, sometimes in a very elaborate fashion, they paid for it by themselves. Moiser Shiyari Lishka. What about the extra for the Shiyari Lishka? So we listed off a whole bunch of communal matters that are paid for by the Shiyari Lishka. What if even after all those things were done, they still had extra money? Now this is unfathomable in a current day democracy, that a budget, an allowed budget, shouldn't be completely used, because people know if they don't completely use up their budget will be cut next year. So this is unheard of. But the people who ran Yerushalayim, who were very ehrlich at the times, actually had extra in their budget. So what would they do with it? They actually went into the commodity business. The Beis HaMikdash went into the commodity business. They bought wine and oil and flour, which were things that the people coming to the Beis HaMikdash often needed to buy. So they invested in that and made money when things went up. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that's what Rabbi Shmuel holds. Rabbi Kiva Omer, ein mistaken mishal hektish. You don't make money, you don't invest hektish funds. Af loy mishal aniyim. And you cannot invest funds that belong to poor people. Tzedakah funds, you don't invest. And there's two pshatim that are mentioned as to why you don't invest. One is because when you invest, I once heard a story, it's very, very rarely ever happens, but I once heard one time someone invested some money and he actually lost money. So you don't invest because you can lose. There's a possibility that you lose, and that's something you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to play with public funds in that way. The other reason is, and this doesn't apply to Aniyim, it only applies to Hektish, and that is Ein Anish B'Makam Ashiris. There's a famous story with a Malamed who once said, if I would be as rich as Rothschild, I would be even richer, because I would tutor on the side. The Beis HaMikdash shuls don't need to do this, don't need to invest. It's not Bakovidik. As a matter of fact, this is even extended a little bit Allah L'maisa. Reb Chaim Kanevsky, and I think Yasha Paskin, that a shul is not allowed to rent out its roof to make money, such as to place solar panels or antennas. Let's say they want to put cellular antenna on top of a shul. A shul is not allowed to do something that's in a conspicuous, that's to raise money in a conspicuous fashion. Because once again, a shul is a public place, like a shul, a Makom Kodesh, it's not appropriate that it should need to make money on the side. As far as investing tzedakah funds, that's actually a shayla, if that's allowed to be done. Anyway, moisur truma. What about the extra from the truma salishka? So until now, we were talking about what was not taken out for the karbanis. The shiur alishka, it first is applied to municipal affairs, and after that, Rabbi Shmuel only says that you invest that money, and Rabbi Kiva says you can't invest that money. Now, what about the Trumas Lishka, the money that we're going to use to buy karbonis? What if you had extra money there? What would they do with that extra money? So the Gemara, Rikuye Zov Tzipui Lebeis Kodesh HaKodeshim. And the Taklin said they used to plate the walls and the floor of the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim with gold. And that's what they used it for. They bought gold to flatten out and to use as wallpaper and floor covering. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Moiser Pears. Now the Pashut Pshat in Moiser Pears is the profits of the earlier investment that we mentioned a moment ago. Rabbi Shmuel was the Shita who held that the extra money from the Shari Alishka would be invested. So those profits, what would you do with those profits? Kates Hamizbeach. You bought extra oilos, carbonis oilos, communal oilos, that whenever the Beis HaMikdash was, whenever the Mizbeach was idle, meaning there were no carbonis brought, then you would draw from this fund to buy carbonis of oil. Moiser Truma. What do you do with the leftover money if you have extra money in the Truma Salishka and you brought all the carbonis, but you still have extra money? So he said Lechlisharis. So now we have a second shita. A moment ago we said that Moiser Truma, they would buy gold to plate the walls and the floors of the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim. And now we have another shita who holds that Moiser Truma, you bought Klisharis with it. And it's logical to buy a Klisharis with the leftovers of the money that was earmarked for Karbonis, because the Klisharis also is part of the process that processes the Karbonis. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Moiser Truma. So now we have a third shita of what they did with the extra money from the Karbonis. L'keitz HaMizbech. You buy more Karbonis with it, which is also very logical, because the Truma Salishka, of course, was for communal Karbonis. So it's logical that you bring more communal Karbonis with it. Moiser Nesachim. What if you had extra from the Sachim? So the Sachim are wine offerings. What if there's extra wine? L'chlisharis, you use that once again to buy a klisharis with it. Reb Chananya Skana Kriyanim Limer, Moshe Nesachim is Keitza Mizbech. You use that to buy extra karbanis of oila. Moshe Truma, L'chlisharis, which we already had a shita who said Moshe Truma goes L'chlisharis. Zevizet L'chayu Moedim Paris. The Pasha Pshat of this Mishnah is both Reb Chanina and Rabbi Akiva dispute that there's even such a thing as Moiser Paris, which Rabbi Shmuel holds that there is, because Rabbi Shmuel held that you were allowed to invest hektish funds, but both Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Akiva argue that one might not invest hektish funds, and therefore they disagreed about the Moiser Paris because it was never relevant, because they never did it. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Kevish Para. Now there's a v'chulu, which is referring to the Lashon Shel Zahuris. We said that there was a piece of wool that was thrown into the fire when they burnt the Para Aduma that was also payable from the Truma Salishka. So Zok the Gemara, Shmuel Bar Nachman, B'Shem Rabbi Yonasan, said Gimel L'Shoynesin. There were 3 times where they used wool in the process of karbonis. There's the shel seir, the sira mishtaleach. The value of that wool was a sela, and the reason why we're going to see it's a sela instead of a shekel, like of the mitzayra, is you needed more wool for the sira mishtaleach than for the mitzayra, because as we learned earlier, that wool was split in half. Half was put on the horns of the sheep that was thrown down, and the other half was put in the Beis HaMikdash, and even some was put at the top of the cliff, so that Klal Yisrael can see that their chatoim were niskaper. So since you need a fair amount of it, you take the amount worth of selling. But shel mitzayra, which is a part that they used in the processing of the mitzayra, they didn't need as much. The shekel, all they need was a shekel value worth of wool. And shel para, but if the para aduma, it's b'shtei sloim, you need even more. The reason why you need more is because when you throw it into the fire, it needs to have some weight to it so that it could fall into the fire. So you need a lot more mass of wool so that it should fall quickly and easily into the fire, not just blow away.
When Klal Yisrael saw the wool in the Beis HaMikdash, how is it that they saw that their chatoim were neschaper?
Thank you for asking that, because the wool was red in color when it started, and after the Siram Shalech fell down, the wool turned white.
Oh, wow.
So the red wool actually turned white. Reb Chananya, the Bar Schavin, Reb Bo Bar Zavdo, B'Shem Reb Shimon ben Chalapta, Shalpara, B'Shtei Sloim Umechza. It wasn't 2 sloim, it was 2.5 sloim, which is even more worth of wool, because you needed a lot of it. There is the Mafkin Lishna Basarazus. And there are others who, instead of saying 2.5, they said 10 zuz, which is exactly the same thing expressed in a different fashion. Because each sela has in it 4 zuz. So if you have 2.5 sela, in effect you have 10 zuz. Rabbi Huda b'Shem Rab Shmuel, Talmid Chachamim Hamalamden es HaKohanim Hilchas Shchita, Hilchas Kabbalah, Hilchas Rika. They had a training system in the Beis Hamikdash. When the Kohanim came in, they had to be trained. And I'm sure they came in once a year, they probably needed a refresher course. So they actually had a full-time training staff in the Beis Hamikdash. Where do we get the funds to pay them? Because it's also part of the processing of the karbonis. In order to process the karbonis properly, the kohanim have to be well informed as to their avoidus and how they're done. So therefore, it was logical to draw on the funds from the Trumas Alishka, which were earmarked.
Where's the expense? Where's the expense?
To pay these malabdim.
These were other kohanim, weren't they? That's their job. They need to get paid.
They were not necessarily kohanim.
Well, what else do the kohanim do? I mean, this is.
But even if they were kohanim, they weren't necessarily kohanim. But even if they were kohanim, it wasn't their mishmar. These were full-time employees of the Beis Hamikdash. As a matter of fact, the Mefarshim asked, "You're not allowed to charge money to teach Torah," and the answer that in Chanami you're not. But these were full-time employees, so they had no other means of earning a living, and therefore they were paid kipayel bottle. They were not allowed to be paid to teach Torah, but they were paid because they couldn't engage in a regular job because they were expected full-time to be training the kohanim that were coming in to the lishka.
You would think that other kohanim train, just like
you would
doctors.
think it would be like by the kohanim for the kohanim.
Right.
It doesn't say who they were. They could have been kohanim, but the main thing is that they were Talmidei Chachamim. And why should kohanim do it for free? I mean, they have to survive. How would these kohanim survive financially if they were full-time teaching other kohanim?
The full-time, the mishmer, the kohanim who have a mishmer, part of.
No, these were full-timers. These were not just miluim. These were actually full-timers. And that's logical to say that they have to be full-timers because they have to know their stuff really well. When you come in for like 1 week a year, you'll be rusty. So they actually had full-time trainers there. Mm-hmm. So to the course of Yitzchak Bar Redifa, B'Shem Rabbi Imi Mibakri. I'm sorry, that was very bad. B'Shem Rabbi Imi Kama Mevakre Mume Kachim Noitlin Schoren Mitrumas Alishka. They also had a full-time crew who were checking the animals for mumen. That was also a full-time crew. So they got paid from Trumas Alishka. And the Tatlin asks that it's usher for a rov to take money to be boidik a carbon. And the reason why it's usher to take money to be boidik a carbon is because the kohanim received b'choros of Klal Yisrael. A b'chor has to be brought as a carbon. But if the b'chor has a mum, then the kohen can just keep the animal for himself. So the kohanim had a vested interest in finding mumen in their b'choros that they received from Klal Yisrael. So if a rav accepts money to check for a mum, the rav will be inclined or pressured to say that there is a mum when there really isn't, because otherwise the kohen bringing him the bechoros will find another Rav who will paskin in his favor. So that's why it's also to take money to paskin on a mum. But in this case of the Tachlin, it wasn't a problem because they weren't paid by the piece. They were paid by the hour. It was a full-time job. So they didn't make any more or less money if they found more or less mumen. Therefore, we can assume they'll remain completely objective. Rav Tamcha Bar Chia, B'Shem Absaloi, said that Magiye, Sefer Azar, the Sefer Torah, in the Azar, there was someone who checked it regularly to make sure it was pristine. The Gra learns it's the Sefer Ezra, which means that there was a special Sefer Torah that was written by Ezra, Sefer, that they knew was 100% reliable, and that was used as the example to compare any Sefer Torah to make sure that it was completely kosher, so that the person who was in charge of that Sefer Torah was also able to be paid, Mishur Elishka. They took from Trumas Elishka because that was also an important functioning portion of the avoid. Gidol Bar Binyamin, B'Shem Reb Asi, said that Shnei Dayanik Zaylos Noitlin Schorim Trumas Elishka. They were actually Dayanim, and it doesn't mean Zaylos, it's referring to Dayanim that Paskin Dinei Mominus, that were in the Sanhedrin. They also were able to get paid from the Trumas Halishka. I'm not sure if he speaks about it here, the Taklin, but there were Dayanim that were also on staff that got paid from the Shiare Halishka. Okay,
What's the hay?
I'm sorry?
What's the hay? Is the hay Rev Gidl? He lost his Rov. He lost.
There's a little hay over here. I'm not sure. I didn't check it up. We have to look at the. We have to look at the. I think it's the Bach. Let's see. So I don't see. Let's see if I can find the hay. Oh, here it is. The Nuschas HaBavli. So I guess there's a similar Gemara in the Bavli where it says Gidol Bar Minyumi B'Shem Abasi. Instead of Binyamin, it's Minyumi in the Bavli. So he still didn't get his rabbi certificate. Okay, so they also get paid in Mishur Elishka. Shmuel Amar Noshim Ha'argush B'Paroiches Noitlin Schorim Trumas Elishka. Now the Paroiches that we're discussing here is the Paroiches in the second base of Mikdash that's separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In the first base of Mikdash, there was a solid wall. The Amatraklin was taken up by a solid wall that was an Amma thick in between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But the second base of Mikdash was much, much taller than the first base of Mikdash. And in order to have a wall that would be high enough to cover the whole height of the space between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, it was very high. I think it was 40 amas high. They needed a foundation that would be much wider than an amma. With such a thin foundation of an amma, it would have toppled over. There would need to maybe be 5-6 amas at its base in order to support such a tall wall. So because of that, they couldn't use a wall to separate between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. So what they did was they hung two parecheses, one on the Kodesh side of the space in between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, and one on the Kodesh HaKadoshim side. And the way the Kohen Gadol walked from the Kodesh to the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the two curtains were offset. One was to the right, one was to the left. So one had a space in it so that the Kohen Gadol could enter the space in between the two curtains. And then he walked through the curtains, and then he came out on the Kodesh HaKadoshim side on the other end. So who made these parechesim? It was women who wove those. They also got paid from the Trumas Elishka. Abchuna Amar, mitrumas bedekabayis. The pareches wasn't taken from the karbanis, rather it was taken from the bedekabayis, the general upkeep funds of the Beis Hamikdash. Ma'polik, what is the machlokes about as to whether or not you could pay for the pareches from the Trumas Elishka or from the general Beis Hamikdash funds? Shmuel Ovid Law Kikelim, the Gra changes to Kalim. Shmuel considers the pareches like a klisharis. Without it, I guess the avodah wouldn't be kosher, so therefore you treat it on klisharis, which you could buy from the Trumas Halishka. And Rav Huna says, no, this is part of the building, and for the building, you take money from the general building maintenance.
It's a one-time expense. I don't understand.
It seems like they would constantly be working on it. If it got dirty, if it had to be replaced, it seems like the parechas was an ongoing expense. It wasn't just made it once.
Such an interesting Gemara, because practically speaking, we usually say the opposite. We usually say what they hold of, and then the Gemara says practically how does it make a difference? Lamai nafkamina, and then we would say that one says that it would come from the Trumas Halishka, and the other one would say that it comes from the Kabayas. Here we do it the other way around. You follow what I'm saying?
Is it that way? I thought often you have a machlokes in halacha, and then the Gemara gives an insight as to the reasoning for the machlokes. That's not so unusual.
Okay, fine. All right.
Amar Reb Chizkiya, Tani Rabbi Yehuda, good Gadois. Rabbi Yehuda from good Gadois said that HaKetoris, L'chol Karbonos HaTzibur, boin mitrumas halishka. The Ketoris and all other Karbonos HaTzibur are brought from mitrumas halishka. Mizbeach Hazav, which was considered like a keli because it was quite mobile, L'chol Chlisharis, boin mimoishe nesachim. They're brought from the leftover nesachim, because we learned in the Mishnah, at least according to one shita, that extra money from the nesachim was used to buy a klisharis. How about the mizbech ha'olah, which was the big stationary mizbech, the ha'heichal b'hazarais, so the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, and I'm going to slide into the Gra over here because he changes things a little bit. Mizbech ha'olah boyin mi bedek habayis. So he changes the words. Our Gemara reads boyin from Shiori Alishka, and the Gra changes it to boyin mi bedek habayis. Chutz la'azaros, but any part of the walls or infrastructure that was out of the Azara, which would indicate Yerushalayim, any walls or municipal issues from Yerushalayim, boin mishiyari halishka, that you used the money that was left over in the lishka after the Trumas Halishka. Frekti Gemara, how could you say that? Vatani we learned, and let's go back into the Gra. Vatani Avne Yerushalayim my alim behen. We learned that the stones to build public structures, public walls in the city of Yerushalayim, you could be moil in them, and we know v'chiyesh meila b'shirayim, but there is no meila. The shiyari alishka, the coins that were left in the lishka after the coins that were separated out to buy karbanis with, there's no din meila on those. You're not allowed to have enough from hektish, but it doesn't have the halach of meila that you bring a carbon for. Zok to Gemara, so Oibazoi, why does the Brisa say that you're moil on Avnei Yerushalayim if these stones were paid for with the Shiori Alishka, and you're not even moil on the Shiori Alishka, so surely the stones that you bought with that money shouldn't lead to Me'ila. Zok to Mark Reb Meir. It's good according to Reb Meir, which we had Reb Meir. Reb Meir Omer, my Alan B'Shirayim. Reb Meir holds you can be moil in the Shiori Alishka. And Reb Meir says, why? Because in the odd event that we run out of funds, in other words, the Trumas Halishka, which was designed to buy karbanis with, what if you ran out? All of the Trumas that you made, they made it in Nisan, they made it before Shavuos, they made it now the Trumas Halishka by Sukkot. What if they ran out? They need more coins. So our mayor said they would go back and take more from the Lishka. They would make an additional Trumas Halishka, which means that even the Shiori Alishka still retains its Kedusha of Karbanis until the next year. And the reason for that is because all year long until next Nisan, when you start tapping into the new supply of coins, there's still a potential to have to use that for Karbanis. So if you use those funds to buy stones for the city of Yerushalayim, naturally, they will also have a din me'il. But Gemara, it's not logical to say that, because when the Brisa says you could be moil on the stones of Yerushalayim, it's not telling you that you could just be moil for that year. It means lo'olam voed. If someone has a naw from the stones of Yerushalayim, he'll have meila. But for sure, by then the kedusha and the coins have already expired. So Amar Reb Chia, Klum Amar Reb Meir, Reb Meir only means until next Nisan, when they're starting to use the new supply of coins. Up until that point, all of the coins there have a potential to be used for karbonis, so there's still a din me'il on them. But we're talking about forever and ever. Those stones have a din me'ila. So the Gemara bleib schwer as to the halacha that we just said, that you pay for those stones with shi'ari alishka and you're moil on them forever. That's the Gemara bleib schwer with that, because there's no possible explanation. Amar B'chista, Tana Rabbi Yehuda Gadgadiyos, Hashulchan, V'hamenoira, V'hamizbeichos, V'hapareiches, Ma'akvenes HaKarbonis. If any of these kelim aren't in perfect condition where they belong, it will be Ma'akev the Karbonis. Divrei Reb Meir, the Chachamim say, Ein lach Ma'akev is a carbon, Ella, the Vilna Gaon changes it, Ella, HaKarkov, V'hakeren Belvad. The karkov, which was one of the decorative nets that went around the mizbeach, and the keren, the four corners of the mizbeach. Only those are ma'akev, nothing else. Now the problem, we'll get there in a second. For loikin amar Beliezer, for Rabbi Yosy ben Chanina, there's this that we said that the only part that's ma'akev the avoda of the mizbeach is the kronos and the karkov. This is not consistent with what we heard over from Rabbi Lozer and Rabbi Yosy. Terrain Amr, they both said, Kol hein dichsiv noichach ma'akev. Any keli in the Beis Hamikdash of the Torah using the word noichach, when it places it, that's ma'akev. And the Taklin says that's referring to the menorah, that the Torah says that's a menorah titin noichach hashulchan. Put the menorah opposite the shulchan. So the menorah, it's ma'akev. In other words, the avoidance won't be good if the menorah isn't in its exact position. But tzela ain't a ma'akev. If it uses the word tzela, because it says noichach hashulchan al tzela hamishkan teimana v'hashulchan titin al tzela tzafon. So the word noichach is used only in reference to the menorah, but the word tzela is used in reference to both the menorah and the shulchan. So when it says tzela in the ma'akev, which means the shulchan, if it's not perfect and exactly in its right location, it will not be ma'akev d'avodah. From Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, b'shem Rabbi Yossi, I feel tzela ma'akev. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said that no, even if it uses the word tzela when it's describing the location of one of the kelim in the Beis Hamikdash, that will also be ma'akev. So he's saying the shulchan also has to be in its exact place. From Rabbi Ila, b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Ila said in the name of Shmuel ben Nachman, "Va'afilu sima ma'akev." Even if he used the word sima, it will also be ma'akev. So therefore, that includes most of the kelim where it uses the word sima. You put it there. So that's going to be shver, because we just learned that it's only the kronos and the karkev and the mizbeach that are ma'akev. Yet here we see a whole different set of parameters of things that are ma'akev. So the question is, what is really ma'akev? The three shittas that we just had are referring to avodas that are done inside the heichal itself. Those avodas have the rules of the three shittas that we just discussed, which are ma'akev, the menorah, the menorah, and the shulchan, or all the kelim. But when we're discussing that the mizbeach has to be complete, it's karkev and it's keren, that's ba'avodas shebechutz. That's referring to avodas that were done outside. So the problem here is, number one, is we didn't even have the Aron in the second Beis Hamikdash. So if we didn't have the Aron in the second Beis Hamikdash, how were any of the avodas kosher? So they have two shittas of how they answer. One shitta in the Rishonim says that if you have access to that keli, its placement is ma'akev. If you don't have it at all, it won't be ma'akev. But the other one is an Indiana Jones answer, that the Aron was always in the right place. It might not have been visible, but it would have been concealed below the ground in the exact location of where the Aron should be. Zogt Gemara weiter. Amar Chanina, Shachtis Gedoyla Hoysa B'vnei Kahanim Gedoylim. The Kahanim Gedoylim were very vain and very proud and they spent huge money to bring glory to their own names. Sheyoser mishishim kikrezov. Now we learned in the Mishnah that there was a shita that who made these special ramps that the Kohanim Gedolim used when they were processing the paraduma. The Kohanim Gedolim themselves paid for them, and they were very what's the lashon for it? They were happy to show off their glory, and therefore they'd spent over 60 kikarim of gold to build these ramps. They would spend. Even if they had a pre-existing ramp from an earlier Kohen Gadol, they would rip it down and build a custom ramp for themselves when they were processing the paraduma. Everybody wanted people to say, "Oh, that's the ramp of Moshe Kohen Gadol," and the next guy said, "No, I don't want that. I want to be known for it. I want everyone to say that's the ramp of Chaim Kohen Gadol." So they spent huge amounts of money to customize these ramps to bring them glory. How could you say that these elaborate ramps were just vanity projects? Shimon HaTzadik, who for sure would not engage in vanity projects, so he needed 2 paradumas in his time because they had a lot of wars, and during wars people come in contact with Mason, and therefore they need to hire him. And because of that, they actually have to make 2 paradumas in his time. And loy bekevish yasu. Each paraduma he made a special ramp for. So first of all, Shimon HaTzadik didn't make vanity projects, and B, why would he have to redo the ramp? If he made a second paraduma, he already had a ramp in his name. Why would he need to make another ramp in his name? So clearly it's not a vanity project. The reason why such money was spent on these ramps is Islach Lamemer, Shimon HaTzadik, Shachatzoya. You can't say that. So Ma'kadan. So I was what shot that he did this? It's Al Shemayla Hibipara, Silsal Hibipara. It's to show chashivas for the paraduma. To show chashivas for the paraduma, each paraduma had its own custom ramp, and that showed silsal. The tackle means covered. It shows respect for the paraduma. Now, even if the Kohen Gadol is on this ramp, I'm sure it passed over a very scenic area. If I'm not mistaken, it went over Nachal Kidron, because that was the Nachal in between Har Zeisim and the Beis Hamikdash. I believe that the paraduma was brought on Har Zeisim. I believe that's where it was brought. But whatever it was, this ramp that went over the valley to bring the paraduma was very, very scenic. So what stops the Kohen from going to the guardrail and looking down to see what's going on? And what if he sticks his head out and he looks down and there happens to be a mace right below him? After all this expensive building the ramp, he became tummy anyway. So therefore, Tani, we learned Zizin Uksolim Hoyoytsu Mikan Mikan. They were projectiles sticking out of the sides of the bridge. So even if you look down, you couldn't see down. It was blocked by a wooden platform that stuck out beyond the guardrail. So even if you look down, you were still protected by that oil, and you couldn't see much. So the Kohanim shouldn't lean over to look out at the scenery and then possibly become tummy. Rabbi Kiva says that you cannot do business with Hekdesh's money, and therefore, if you have extra coins, the Bezdin or the Beis Hamikdash does not invest it in soilas and shemen and in yayin. They just keep it. However, there is a condition under which we would allow someone to invest these funds. Ela imrotza, if the broker doing these investments, yahefset shalot, if it's accepted upon him that even if it drops in value, he'll guarantee the investment, but vaschar lehektish. So if it goes up, Hektish will benefit. If it goes down, Hektish won't lose. That's a one-way investment. That would be mutter. In that case, it will be mutter. So imagine somebody has such a great idea for hektish to profit. He's so sure that the stock is going to go up that he's willing to guarantee it. That such an investment we would allow hektish to enter into. Kada Bar Zmina, like this fellow whose name was Bar Zmina, is pocket Gabe model the Yasmin. He was charged with the responsibility to take care of the estate of Yisayimim, so he had to manage their financial affairs, and he wanted to know if he could invest the money from the estate on behalf of the Yisayimim. Also, the Sharler of Mother Amalei in Boyes the Hafsada the Dach for Agar the Tevaichain. If you're willing to accept full responsibility for any losses, yet only 50% of the profit if it goes up, therefore it will be shori, that will be mutter. Reb Chia Bar Ada is packet gabe medal the Yasmin Babitke. And the fact Reb Chia Bar Ada did just that. He invested the money from the assignment, but he guaranteed to fill in any loss, and he only wanted 50% of the profits. The shaila here is, why isn't that ribis? If I'm borrowing money from you, in other words, I have here a broker who's investing funds on behalf of the assignment. Now, if he's taking 50% of the profits, that means I'm borrowing the funds because the assignment are providing the funds, and I'm benefiting it. I'm benefiting because if it goes up, I'll get some. But it's not 50-50 because I'm taking the full financial loss, which means I'm giving benefit to the assignment. I'm giving them benefit that they're not going to lose money by giving them that guarantee, and I'm borrowing money from them. So I'm giving them back more than I'm getting. Why is that not called ribis?
He's not borrowing, he's investing on their behalf. That's borrowing.
Yeah, well, not really, because we're investing on both of our behalves. Because if it goes up, I get 50% of the profit. So in essence, what's happening is 50% of the investment is theirs. The other 50% of the money they're lending me, right? And that's why I benefit 50% if it goes up. It wasn't just a commission.
There's a chance he won't benefit.
I understand. But the fact of the matter is, there's an arrangement here where I'm borrowing money from them. Technically, I'm borrowing money because if the investment goes up, I benefit, and I'm paying them for the use of their funds by guaranteeing that they're not going to lose money. So that should be a shaila of ribis.
Why don't we just say that you're going into partnership with them? It's like offering an investment.
Yeah, but who's putting up the money? Their partner is lending them the money. If I put up 50% of the money and they put up 50% of the money, that's a partnership. But if they put up 100% of the money, that's not a partnership. Yeah, it is a partnership, but they're lending me the money for my chil.
Yeah, but Chazal always say that if you want an investment to be successful, go find yourself a Talmud Chochem and lend him money and make him part of the deal.
But he's going to take 50% of the loss as well. Here, you're making him absorb, the person that you're lending the money to, you're making him absorb the full brunt of the loss.
Not necessarily. The Talmud Chochem doesn't have any money to take 50% of the loss. He would never agree to your deal.
Well, so then it's not ribis. But in this case that we're discussing, it's a shaila of ribis.
No, but the Yisayim don't take a loss.
I understand. The Yisayim aren't taking a loss. He's taking a loss. So I'm benefiting from the funds of the assignment, and I'm paying for that benefit by accepting full responsibility of the loss.
Okay.
But the answer is this is only ribis derabbanan. Ribis deraisa is schar notar, meaning I'm paying you a fixed amount for the use of your funds. If I borrow it for 6 months, I'm going to pay you 3% interest. So that's a fixed amount. That's ribis deraisa. These financial arrangements were nothing clear as to how much I'm going to have to give because we don't know how the investment turned out. That's ribis, but it's ribis derabbanan, and the rabbanan l'tzarich mitzvah helping out the assignment will allow you to. Under those conditions, they didn't create the issue derabbanan of ribis, and this leads to other silos because there are Rishonim who hold that you're allowed to borrow money with ribis if it's not ribis ksutza, if it's only avak ribis l'tzorcha mitzvah. And the shaylas, if you're allowed to. There's actually a big shayla. The Mishabura holds you can't, but there are shittas who hold that if someone needs money to buy food for Shabbos, he's allowed to borrow money even if he's going to pay interest if it's only avak ribis. Let's the Gemara about Moshe Peres. So the Gemara must listen to Rabbi Shmuel. This Mishnah that says that what do you do with the Moshe Peres? What do you do with the profits of the Peres? We learned that at the end of the Mishnah. The Gemara says the profits of the Peres, the profits of the investment that Hektish did, you buy Keita Mizbeach. You buy Karbonis, oilos that will be brought. If the Mizbeach is idle, we can bring those Karbonis at that time. Zok to Gemara, to Reb Chia bar Yosef, Pasam Asnisa. Reb Chia bar Yosef explained the Mishnah, Moiser Peres, Schar Lehektish, the money of the Peres, which means, according to Rabbi Shmuel, who holds that you're allowed to invest the money of Hektish into Peres, that's the money we're talking about. And Moshe Nesachim, when the Mishnah used Moshe Nesachim and said the Moshe Nesachim, you buy a klisharis with that, that's referring to Saravias. What is Saravias? Saravias is money that Hektish made, but inadvertently. They weren't trying to invest, but they ended up benefiting. And there's two examples of how that would occur. At the beginning of the season, Hektish makes a deal with its suppliers. And let's say at the beginning of the season, you can get 3 saw of flour for 1 coin, 1 seller, for instance. And they made a deal that they're going to be supplied at that rate with flour. And what happened is that the cost of flour went down, and now you can get 4 saw for a seller. So we say that the supplier has to give that extra saw. In other words, when you're supplying to Hektish, it's always at Hektish al Elyonim. So even if the price of flour went down, you have to give them the extra saw, even though the original deal was you were only giving 3. So now Hektish has extra flour here. If Hektish has extra flour, they will sell it and they profit off of that. That's what the Moshe Nesachim means. Another pshat that the Rishonim say is the opposite. You originally made a deal with the merchant to be provided with 4 saw for a seller, and it went up. It went up in value. And now you only get 3 saw for a seller. The merchant still has to provide the 4 saw for a seller, which means Hektish benefits financially. Once again, they could make money off that, and that's what we're talking about. That extra money will go to Klisharis, as it says in the Mishnah. So that's how Rabbi Chia bar Yosef learned the Mishnah, that Moshe Peres means proceeds of this investment that was under dispute. Rabbi Shmuel holds you're allowed to make those investments, yet Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina in the Mishnah felt that there was no such thing as this profit, because the investment wasn't allowed in the first place. But Rabbi Yochanan Pasam Asnisa differently. Rabbi Yochanan said that the Moshe Peres was not proceeds of the illegal investment that Rabbi Yeshua suggested earlier. Rather, Moshe Peres was Usar Revius. Moshe Peres means the Sar Revius that we explained a minute ago, which means it would be possible to have Moshe Peres, even according to Rabbi Kiva, and even according to Rabbi Chanina, who held you weren't allowed to make this investment. Moshe Peres was still a possibility. And Moshe Nesachim was Birutzin. Birutzin means is that when Hektish sells flour or wine, it's referring to wine here, for the Nesachim, when Hektish bought the wine, they received the wine, not only that the cup is completely full, but the cup is overflowing, and it doesn't spill out because the surface tension holds the wine in, even though it exceeds the capacity of the keli. But when Hektish uses the wine to make the nesachim, it only fills it up to the top. It doesn't overfill it with surface tension. So there's a little bit of extra wine that Hektish is always banking and retaining, and that money is what we're talking about when we say Moshe Nesach. So frek the Gemara, the last later Reb Chia bar Yosef lebirutzen. That means Reb Chia bar Yosef, who says that Moshe Nesachim is Saravius, he does not hold about this. And what about the extra money of the Birutzim? What does he do with that? So Omer Chizkiah, Madanafal Saravius, Nafal Birutzim. There is in fact that extra profit of the Birutzim, of the extra wine that overflows it, but he lumps that together with the Saravius. Both those benefits that Hektish has is what we're referring to with the Moshe Peres. So Zok Gemara, Al Daita to Reb Chia bar Yosef Nich. According to Reb Chia bar Yosef, it makes sense how we learned our Mishnah. Ein mistrakim b'shol Hektish, af lo b'shol aniyim. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Chanina both argued on Rabbi Shmuel, who says you could make an investment with Hektish's funds. They dispute that. That's why the last line of the Mishnah says that both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Chananya argued on Rabbi Shmuel and said there's no such thing as schar peres because you didn't do the business deal in the first place. But I'll die to Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Yochanan, where Moshe Peres means something that everybody agrees to. Everybody agrees that Hektish had this benefit. Kasha, why does the Mishnah say that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Chananya disagreed with Moshe Peres? They very much agreed with Moshe Peres because it's a perfectly legitimate benefit that Hektish had. Vatanin, we learned, Amdu Migimel, Yispek Medalit. The halacha is if the price changes, Hektish benefits. So what does it mean? So tomorrow what it means is it means they disagreed with Rabbi Shmuel, who said that this extra money went to buy karbonos oila. But they agreed that there was that benefit, and in fact they just disputed what was done with the benefit. While Rabbi Shmuel said they bought Ketz Mizbeach, they argued. They said that they bought Klei Sharis with the extra money. We better stop here. It's already 6:54. So we're still a little bit over an Amud behind, but we'll catch up eventually. Tomorrow's going to be a little bit more difficult tomorrow. Okay, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Yeah.
So does anybody have information